don't know why Zoom announces it now that you're recording. It's a little unsettling if you ask me, but welcome everyone to this open informational discussion with our honored guest, Chris Richardson. I'm so appreciative of his time and what he has done in Denver with the STAR program. As many of you may know, I hope to make similar adjustments here in Cincinnati in regards to mental health care access and having teams in place to handle those situations, and taking that away from the police, and not in a punitive way. This is not to punish the police or be us versus them in any kind of way, but just so that we have more options. So with that, Chris, go ahead and introduce yourself, and I'd love for everyone to hear just a little history of the STAR program and its relationship with Denver police and just how that has really grown recently.
Sure. So I'm Chris Richardson. I'm the Associate Director of Criminal Justice Services with the Mental Health Center of Denver. I'm recognizing that on this platform, I feel like John Oliver with a void behind me a little bit. I just picked a very terrible background, so I apologize for that. I always like to start our story a little bit back in 2016 when we actually started Denver's first co-responder unit, and that is a team of social workers that ride alongside with police, going to behavioral health calls. And really the goal was to try to access people into services, have more creative solutions around how do we help someone that's in crisis, how do we involve a trauma-informed lens, harm reduction type style of interacting with someone. And so in 2016, we started with 4 of us, and over that first year, there was a lot of buy-in from police of what this partnership looked like and what the creativity of kind of going and engaging someone in a different style, in a different way to really kind of promote long-term recovery and support. So fast forward 5 years, our co-responder team is now close to 40. So we have about 40 social workers in Denver riding with police all over. But during that time, we were given a police radio on how we respond and stuff. And the stuff that came across 911, we kept asking, like, why are we sending police in the first place? And that really led to some pretty intense conversations and how do we do something different? How do we send the right response? So I think it was in 2019, we actually went to the chief and talked with him about how could we maybe look at this mythical model called Cahoots. No one had heard of it. It's been around for about 30 years up in Eugene. Absolutely phenomenal program. And so the chief sent a delegation of police, 911, Mental Health Center of Denver, community advocates, and people with lived experience up to Eugene to kind of do a 3-day tour. We took as much information as we could from them, kind of seeing how they interacted with the community, what kind of response looks like. And we brought all that information back down to Denver and kind of started conversations of how do we make a Eugene type model Denver centric. And so with funding kind of secured through a tax initiative, we determined that we were going to do a pilot in 2020 that launched a social worker and a paramedic to these low-level 911 type calls in hopes that we can help connect people to resources that they're deeming is important to them. A little tiny thing called coronavirus happened. So we got pushed back a couple months, but recognized that during that time, our community was definitely hurting. There was people that once had service connection, once had positive supports that no longer had it. They felt a lot more isolated, a lot more anxious. And so us in Denver just determined we need to lean into this problem. We need to help support our community. So on June 1st, we started our first day of STAR, and that was keying up on the radio at 10 o'clock in the downtown corridor area and immediately getting our first call. And so we just finished up our year-long pilot on June 1st. It's still continuing, but officially June 1st was the end of our year. We went close to 1,400 calls. We were able to go on every single one of those calls without having to request police backup on any of them. We were able to self-resolve. The most amazing thing is actually 30% of our calls were police requesting us. It was them being dispatched to something that at the call taker's surface level was something that needed a police response. And when they got there, they cleared it and said, we need to call in someone that's more appropriate than police response. So we could tap them out, tap us in, and help get that person services. So now Denver is in the process of creating what expansion will look like and how many vans we'll need, how many people we'll need, how do we expand the not just the front end crisis response, but the back end support, either through case management support, peer support, whatever that might look like, just to make sure that we are helping people in need in Denver access resources that they're requesting.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, in a year's time, now about 30% of your calls, the police are arriving on the scene and determining, okay, this really isn't a police related call. Let's get STAR out here instead.
Yep. Yeah, and that was something that I think was just police saw us as a resource and a connection to be able to help support what it was that they're dealing. And I think it's one of those kind of transformational community things where the person that's in crisis was like appreciative that the police were calling in someone that may know more about system navigation or connectedness, which really kind of changed how that person viewed the police in that moment, because they said, cool, I'm calling in the right people. I hope you have a good day. I'm going to leave now. And it really was kind of that whole holistic kind of, we're just here to help support the community to the best of our abilities.
It makes me think a lot of restorative justice. Let's help the situation as a whole instead of just, the tiny little bits and pieces of it. A question from a viewer for you. They would like to know if this is a different phone number or call center, or is this all operated through 911? How does dispatching work?
So right now it is all dispatched through 911. There is a separate number. It's 913-720-913 STAR. Don't ask me how we got STAR as a phone number, but it's connected actually. And it's one of those that actually still gets routed to dispatch, but it at least clues the dispatcher in as this is what is the call taker is initially requesting. And as they go through their questions and triage of what that call taker is reporting, or then they can kind of funnel it into the right response to the right situation, whether that be STAR, whether that be a co-response, whether that just be policing.
Do you have any idea on maybe in like the last few years on average, how many calls was Denver PD responding to that was, specifically related to mental health?
I don't know it off the top of my head. I know it's pretty decent. I mean, the reality is 1 in 5 individuals, I think it might be 1 in 4 now, has a mental health that they are dealing with. So the likelihood that is a pretty high number is likely. I think when we in Denver were intentional about how are we going to identify what a STAR call would be appropriate as. So we had the buckets that we kind of identified back in August that the 911 dispatchers would hotkey so that we had data to go off of where in the community would STAR be most appropriate when we're able to expand citywide. So we use that information to actually help us know where we need to have vans, where we need to have personnel, what times a day we're going to need personnel, with the hope that we'll continue to see gaps and fill those gaps as we expand our programming.
In Cincinnati, we, let's see, the data that I collected, and I don't know exactly, how these calls are categorized necessarily, but year by year, our police department responds to about 8,000 mental health related calls. And those are separated into 2 categories, violent and non-violent. Mm-hmm. And the divide is between those 2 is almost split evenly down the middle. And again, I don't know what criteria they use to determine what is considered violent versus non-violent. But what I have seen is that the violent seems to be either slowing or progressing less quickly than the non-violent calls. Those numbers are increasing year by year by year. And, as I've had conversations with police officers, asking them, do you think that this would be beneficial? Would this be helpful to you? And do you think this could benefit the community? I have a lot of officers who are like, yes, like we we feel under equipped with like our 40 hours of training, which I'll say Cincinnati does put more time into training our officers for mental health situations than some other cities do. And I have other officers who are very skeptical, not necessarily of the process itself, but of the, that will never happen. Like, that sounds great, but there's no way we're going to be able to make that work, which kind of segues into another question from a viewer. She says, did you receive any pushback or resistance from police or other city officials? And if so, how was that worked through?
No, I actually, I grew up in Denver and I'm a proud Denverite. I'm actually pretty proud of how our city has been able to be progressive and pretty creative, and we need to continually develop and grow as a community of best ways to interact, and where are we seeing gaps and how do we fill those gaps, and how do we be really thoughtful in bringing community partnerships into that. I think STAR really stood on the shoulders of our co-responders. Co-responders back in 2016 laid the foundations of how clinical and law enforcement kind of work side by side, and the goal being, how do we best help our community? So when we stood up STAR, it was a pretty easy, they knew our skill set, they knew the way we approach people, they knew we had radio training, they knew all that stuff. So it was like the second we keyed up, we already had buy-in from the system of how you respond to a behavioral health crisis. I think the continuous thing is it's showing what your worth is, showing how you can interact, how you can use your skill set to intervene in a positive way where outcomes are people are feeling safe, that they feel like there's a plan in place, that they can have a next day ahead of them that might be a little brighter than the one they're currently experiencing. And so I think that does take a little bit of time. We just in Denver and we started that process in 2016, and this was just kind of the evolution of what that looks like. And like we were saying earlier, I think a lot of law enforcement, I don't know how long 911's been in existence, but historically we've had police as the response, fire as the response, and paramedics, and we've never changed anything. And as society has developed and grown, and 911 has been utilized for all versions of different crises, from old age to youth to anything related to the behavioral health spectrum, we haven't changed what the response is. And this is kind of that next evolution of taking some of the stuff off the plate of people that only get the 40 hours of training or only get that kind of went into this field to keep their communities safe. And so we provide an alternative fourth leg that kind of gives that, takes that off of their plate and says, let us handle this, and we can kind of coordinate as needed within the same system, with the end goal being that we're just trying to help our community out and feel that they have connection.
Yeah, I think something that I've said rather recently is it's really, in my mind, an unfair expectation to have other first responders handling this kind of thing, because I do some crisis response, right? Like, I've been on scene after like shootings, I've been on scene after armed robberies, things like that. And it would be, unfair to ask me as a therapist to, arrive on scene and, expect to, help people cope with what's going on, but then being asked to put out the house fire that happens to be happening at the same time, or to apprehend this person who is, robbing someone. It just doesn't make sense. But then when the roles are reversed, there seems to be no issue with that. Why does it seem fair to ask police officers to do what others are trained to do? And, I get that everyone can and should learn how to, use empathy and active listening, but it's so much more than that.
Yeah.
So much more than that. Can you tell us a little bit more about what is different between, a police officer arriving on scene for one of these calls versus STAR?
Mm-hmm. I think it's in the first is we show up in a van, which getting this off the ground, it's a little weird to show up to someone on a van because they're just like, who are you and why are you here? So I think it's getting around that piece. Also, we show up and right now it's just jeans and a t-shirt and really kind of being as like approachable as we can. We don't have any formality attached with us. It's just, we're just trying to see how can we help you in this moment. It's a little bit different also because I think people are expecting police to be the ones that show up. And when we do, when we're saying you're not in trouble, we're just trying to, where can we get you? What do you need? What is it? Is it, some people, just the idea of getting them somewhere that is like a park with shade instead of a front porch that is in the sun. It's just like, yeah, I can get you to the park. I'll give you water. I'll give you food. It keeps you, you're not going to get heat stroke or any of that stuff. And they're just like, but isn't that the same thing? And I'm like, yeah, but no one bothers the person in the park. No one calls 911 on that. This is all about making sure that you feel good. And while we're going there, can I talk to you about other resources that might be something you'd be interested in? And that person can tell me to, not interested now, or it's like, yeah, I've always wanted to do mental health treatment. the barriers are so problematic. And it's like, if you're saying you're ready, I will move every barrier I can to make sure you're getting same day access to support and services. And that's really where the community buy-in about, it's not just walking the walk, it's saying, when someone says they're ready to make a change, how do you as a community galvanize that change and say, we're going to make sure that you have access to what you're saying right now. So I think that's a little bit different and a little bit something people don't expect, quite honestly.
And what do you do about like situations where the individual really needs to be hospitalized? Like that's for sure the next step where they need to go.
So on all those calls that we've been on, we only had to initialize a mental health hold about 40 times. And that's usually someone that just, no matter how much we are able to like kind of problem solve and work with them, they're just they're not in a place where they can safely, we can leave and we feel that they're going to be safe. The difference being is we still don't need to call police in that. As licensed individuals, we can write the mental health hold. And I think the scariest part of the mental health hold process is you're basically being put in an ambulance, you're being brought to the hospital, unknown people, unknown situation. STAR allows us a little bit more flexibility in that we can now talk with the ambulances and say, hey, is it okay? I built rapport with this person. I'm walking you through what this process is going to look like. Can I ride in the ambulance with them just so that they know the person that's consistently been in contact from point A to point Z? Get to the hospital, we're with them, we introduce them to the psych doctor, we introduce them to the nursing staff, we talk with them about what follow-up is going to look like from our side. We're going to have someone come. We kind of take away all the unknown or the negative experiences that historically someone has had, and no one's been forced on IMEDs, no one's had to do that process. It's just kind of like, I'd be scared if I didn't know where I was going or what was going to happen or who I was being handed off to. And I think in that even brief moment of us being in contact with someone, we're able to say, this is why we're doing it. But this is only the beginning part of how we're hoping to support you to make sure you're safe. We want to actually get you connected with long-term options that are outside of the hospital, that are outpatient, that you have someone to talk to and can go to when you're not doing well. And so that whole wraparound philosophy really is meant to make that person feel supported, that there's a little bit more trauma-informed practices attached with it, and that they don't feel like, I just got my rights stripped from me, I'm being abandoned, I have to go to a psych hospital, I might have history with psych hospitalizations, but kind of like we're vouching for the people that we're handing you off to make sure that this is as positive an experience as we can, and we'll connect with you afterwards.
And I think that's so amazing because it's, one of the things that I really try to educate people on in this matter is when you have someone who is in crisis, or as we say, their lid has flipped. So, their sense of reasoning has kind of gone out the window. They are in life threat mode. You have someone show up in jeans and a t-shirt, who's just, able to calmly de-escalate the situation with skills beyond empathy and active listening. Again, those are important, but that's not the only thing. But at the same time, I think that, we have many first responders and police officers who are very well intentioned, but I think what often gets missed is when brain is in life threat mode, brain is trying to detect anything possible that could harm it, even if the person themselves is, for lack of a better term, out of their own mind. So really out of their own control. Their brain is still actively detecting threats, right? And what's one thing that we all know a police officer is carrying when they arrive on scene? even if you're not consciously aware or thinking about it, your brain still knows that person has a gun, and your
Yeah.
brain's meant to detect threats. It's going to escalate. Whereas if you have someone who doesn't have that association, it's probably easier to calm down the situation. And then, like you said, being with them every step of the way with that familiarity, it's very grounding to be able to be like, oh, I'm in a hospital now, I'm in a new room, but I've been with this person for the last hour, they've stuck by me. I'm good. I have an anchor, even though, I'm just kind of being tossed around place to place to place. Um,
And I
Jennifer,
think part of what we do is all about like it really is rapport building in a very quick amount of thing. And in those situations, and I'm glad there's not that many, we come up with much more creative solutions to get them either to a walk-in crisis center or a solution center, things that are like not hospital-esque, but being able to talk with someone that I value your life and I care about your life. And that is, I want to make sure you're safe. And this is what I'm going to do to make sure of it. And I'm going to make sure that I'm walking you through that process. We've shown really positive outcomes as a result of that.
absolutely. A viewer is asking that, how have you gotten buy-in from the social workers or the therapists? I know in Cincinnati, we're kind of facing a shortage, so to speak, which is, kind of another hurdle to overcome. But, how did you get buy-in in that regard? And, did you get them from one localized agency? Is it kind of throughout the area? Were you able to get interest from folks out of state who then came into Denver to help with this? Just what has that been like?
Yeah, so I work for the Mental Health Center of Denver. So we're a nonprofit third party. So we're not funded by the city. We're just kind of contracted with them. So all of our employees are outside of the city scope. We're and more tied with the Mental Health Center. So we're able to actually kind of get in people that are interested more on the mental health side related to our organization. I also this is a new field for social work. I think this is one of those up and coming ones. Historically, when I was in school, forever ago, it seems like, it was like, oh, you graduate and you become a licensed clinical social worker and you do therapy. And I can honestly tell you, the idea of doing therapy is like, that's a death sentence to me. Like, that would be awful. So finding this, working with severe and persistent mental illness, working with co-occurring disorders, working with individuals, honestly, that like society's kind of given up on. And I'm always a big rooter of the underdog. So how do we give voice to people that might not feel like they have that voice? Being able to those are my people. Those are the ones that I resonate with. Those are my individuals that I like doing with. I like doing stuff in the community. And there's a niche of social workers that are coming out of the woodwork that are like, this is their field that they want to get into. And I think as these programs grow, both co-responder, civilian response thing, you're going to see a lot more social work programs that are tailored more for this kind of stuff and less towards the therapeutic, traditional therapy kind of roles. So we're definitely leprechauns riding a unicorn kind of population right now, but there'll be more of us.
Yeah, I think that brings up another interesting point, just kind of like the misconception that therapists and social workers don't want to be involved in this type of thing. I think a lot of people, do have, especially probably older generation therapists who have, they are experts in the field. They do what they do extremely well. They probably want to stay in that niche, but I think this younger generation of social workers and therapists is wanting to kind of be more on the front lines, so to speak. And, one of the things that, as I, constantly talk about this, question that often gets brought up is like, well, do therapists and social workers, are they even equipped to go into a situation that could turn violent or things like that? And I have to remind folks, you talk to a therapist or social worker that works in community mental health or on the psych unit of a hospital, we know how to handle violent situations. We're trained for that. I've been assaulted on both of my jobs, both in the community mental health job and the private practice job. And I've known how to de-escalate all of those situations as they come. So I think there's this misconception that social workers and therapists are all peace, love, unicorns and hugs and, all that stuff. But it's like, no, we are prepared for these types of situations, and many of us face violence as a regular part of our jobs already.
Yeah, I think that's what I love about this field and how it like kind of continues to grow and develop is at the end of the day, like I am crisis oriented. I'm working with people in the moment, but I rely heavily on like treatment type back end support. Like that's how we get people skills and relationships and like being able to work with them of like, I'm going to hand you off to someone that is going to be able to work with you moving forward, that I trust and that I care about, and that is going to do really great things to help people recover through that process. And yeah, I think social workers have that stereotype of just kind of being touchy-feely, shrinking violets. And the reality is I think we've talked in our community of like, this area you don't go to. And I'm like, I just delivered bus passes there the other day. I mean, it is the population that we're working with. We're used to in Denver, assertive community treatment oriented. We like to bring treatment to people. We don't expect them to show up to a clinic all the time. I mean, it's not realistic. We need to know how someone in their environment engages. So I think that's historically how our team has been brought up. And that's kind of what's led a lot to our ability to kind of do some of these things in a pretty effective capacity.
Absolutely. I think, Cincinnati right now is kind of in an interesting spot. I think it was early 2020, one of our local colleges that was very well known for their Masters of Mental Health program closed. And while it wasn't a large program, it was still graduating like 7, 8, 9, 10 therapists per year who could either go on to become social workers in community mental health or, therapists in private practice, what have you. And I think I've definitely noticed a large decrease in availability. I've also noticed in Cincinnati, at least, a big shift from community mental health to, private practice. Mm-hmm. So kind of going off a question that was answered earlier, I know that STAR does this a little bit differently, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But the model that I'm presenting for Cincinnati is not to operate this out of a pre-existing agency, but to actually make it a part of our safety department within City Hall, right? Because if you have police, fire, and EMS and social workers, responding to this type of thing, that's a public health and safety issue. In my mind, it should come out of the safety budget. But because of that, I would also like to figure out ways to really make Cincinnati attractive to social workers and therapists who want to do this kind of work, whether that's offering incentives like, hey, if you're licensed in another state and you're willing to move here and do this work, like we will help cover the cost of, getting you licensed in the state of Ohio, and making sure that, you are paid excellently for what you do. So just finding different ways to bring more therapists in, because I definitely see a shortage kind of happening here in Cincinnati. Which, on that note, what does STAR do for funding? How does that work? Like, was there a huge tax increase, or was millions upon millions of dollars taken out of your safety budget? Like, how did that work?
When we started our pilot, it was actually that same year that we had this idea. Denver passed Caring for Denver tax. It's a 25-cent tax on every $100 that goes to behavioral health programs. And I think it was estimated that somewhere between 30 and 36 million a year would be allocated for funding requests. So we were the first ones that kind of said, hey, we have this idea, relatively cheap, when we just kind of want to see if it works. And so Caring for Denver tax funded us, which is nice because we can always say that the city, while the board actually agreed to allow us to get funded, the city and the citizens are the ones that actually funded STAR. So what we did is we used that money, and then the first 6 months of the program, we showed such kind of positive success with it that the mayor actually set aside $1.4 million from the city general fund to be able to expand what STAR is going to look like citywide. And then the goal being that when in the very near future that we can ask for a match from Caring for Denver and really have a robust kind of expansion for STAR for the entire city, not just the downtown pilot population.
about how much do you think that it has cost you or cost the STAR program per se to operate in that first year?
So going on about 1,400 calls, we ran about $200,000 was what the cost of the pilot program was. That mainly funded the paramedic side. The Mental Health Center of Denver actually was able. We're a Medicaid system, so if we're able to bill our Medicaid providers based on the services, we do. So we actually weren't a significant cost associated with that. So I think we're leaving a little bit of money on the table from our side. So.
Yeah, that's incredibly encouraging because I think, Denver is a much larger city than Cincinnati is. And my proposal right now, because we're very anti-tax increase around here, even for the best intentions. It's just, and I want to be mindful and respectful of that. We have so many people in poverty. It's really not fair, to ask them to give more. And so my proposal has been to, again, utilize our current pre-existing safety budget. My idea to get things off the ground is to, apply for specific grants and things like that, so that nothing comes out of city funding at first. But once the program is kind of like going, then using, I think I had put originally like $5 million from our safety budget, but it sounds like we may not even need to use that much at first. And you said earlier you have 40 staff working with police. So like they are in the police departments going on calls with them each day. And then what STAR is doing is separate, like the actual going out on calls yourselves. How many vans or people do you have just focusing on the calls and STAR in that?
So we still just have the one van. We are working on what expansion looks like currently. The goal being that we would start out, since we've never done citywide, we don't know what that looks like. So we'd want to be really thoughtful and intentional with rolling that out. So I think right now, the goal is to have 12 staff hired with kind of a 7-day a week coverage from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. Kind of expand what times we're at, and as well as the weekends. And then hopefully having at least 3 to 4 vans at any given time that can respond citywide. That's going to be interesting because the data is going to tell us like how it's one thing to be in the downtown corridor area where driving around is like, I can get there in 5 minutes. Citywide driving becomes an issue then. So then we're going to know, where do we need to station people? What do we need to do to make sure driving is not like the main thing something is the STAR is doing, that we want to be responsive in a timely manner. So as we build that out, we'll kind of be able to see where our needs are, where our catchment is, and then hopefully down the line have a 24/7 model. And we're all about sending the right response to the right situation. So we really have seen a really positive marriage between STAR being, the first level of low level calls on 911, co-response being the ones where there's like some components that from safety side that we really need to have a police there, but we still want a clinical lens. And then having police as we need police there on robberies and all that stuff. And so having the whole spectrum and not saying, we have STAR now, so we don't need co-responders. I think there's a really good gradient to make sure that every response has the right response attached with it.
As far as the public, I know we talked about kind of police buy-in, city buy-in, or city government buy-in, and then buy-in from the therapists and social workers. How has the public responded, and are they being actively educated on this, resource that is now available to them?
I think the pilot area, I think we've had some pretty positive responses. Definitely a lot of community members. I think when we kicked this thing off, we really didn't know. We were like, we'll have water in the van, we'll have some snacks. It's a good conversation tool. And then we had our local news station actually post something on their Facebook that was like, this is what Denver is doing, and if you're interested in donating. And they actually donated, the community of Denver donated about $40,000 worth of finance just to be able to fund stuff that is on the van. So we were able to take that money and say, every time we had contact with someone, it was, here's water, here's a snack. And they're like, oh, I wish you had sunscreen. And we're like, that's a great idea. I'm gonna put sunscreen on the van. And so we got sunscreen. And then it turned into, condoms, tampons, shirts, shoes, socks, warm blankets, just basically anything that someone helped us inform of, this is what I need and this would have helped me. And it's like, thank you, because that's going to be on the van next time we're there. And so really being responsive to the community. I think providers in the community have found it, especially when they have communities that might have historical triggers with police, and being able to feel like an alternative response is available. As we go citywide, I think I will go a little outside of my niche of what I know about, but a media campaign, the one thing I love about Eugene, Oregon is that no matter where you go up there, they know Cahoots. It's a name brand. And that's what I really want STAR to be, is how do we get the message out that nobody in this community or the community of Denver isn't familiar with what that looks like, and doesn't, knows what they can request and how they can request it, and they get a positive experience. So I think this year will be really interesting, because we're going to have to get marketing teams involved of how do we blast this out, that, this is a service and this is how to do it and this is how to request it. So looking forward to that. And I'm hoping that we can get more community buy-in, and also like have our communities inform us of what's working, what's not, and what would be best for their community. Because what works for downtown might not work in South Denver. It might not work in Montbello area, and being really mindful of what we're bringing to each community, and that we have a pretty diverse work group that's going to be, our workforce that's going to be aware of what's happening in those communities.
So maybe, when you talk about, marketing and really educating the public on this, and having all of those like additional resources, like having condoms and tampons available. I think that's something that people don't realize, that can be incredibly important, especially, with someone who doesn't have, the necessary resources, or just needs that kind of assistance, to be able to be like, yeah, like, we're here for your mental and emotional health too. But if you need something like that, we got you too. And with no judgment, I think that's incredible and huge. If there's anything that you wanted to say to anyone who is hesitant about this or skeptical, what would that be?
I think my biggest thing is change happens, and it's really important to be on the front end of being creative. I think that's what kind of sets communities that are wanting to take that next leap into how do we help support each other in a holistic way. I think it's about getting in a room and having uncomfortable conversations with people you may not agree with, but recognizing at the end of the day, it's about the person that we're making contact with, and how do we get to that person and make sure that their experience is positive, that they're surrounded with a positive outcome, and those resources that really are going to make that have that wellness and recovery. I think those are the biggest ones. I think also the acknowledgement that, we're not, there's things I just don't know. And I like to come at things in every meeting with come educate me, then educate me on what I need to know about what's going on in your community, or educate me on why you don't think we should be working alongside police, or educate me on why, defund me people should not be in the room with me. Because I think the one thing that I always try to come with is the idea that we're kind of the middle. We want to find the middle. We want to find the creative solution. It's not one side or the other side. It really is the ability to make sure that we're all part of a change, and that involves police, that involves people in the community. And it's really getting to the table and saying, we're here to make a change, and we want to do that in the most effective way we can, without, just sticking by one side of, I'm not willing to move or budge or any of that. And it's asking for help. At the end of the day, it's asking for help. I mean, being vulnerable is super scary, but even, there's going to be times where I sit there on a call and I'm like, I don't know what to do. I need to call a co-responder to come help me and bounce ideas off of. And that's not vulnerable. That's, I need support now too. And I think nobody is above that. And I think that's the same with police, is recognizing that, they don't have every solve for every answer. And that's where asking for help is, let someone come in and help, let someone take some of that stuff off your plate. And at the end of the day, it's the flip. It's, I need police sometimes to help me on certain things. And I think they're coming at it where they understand where I come from, so that we're not trying to put people in jail. We're trying to help, but I just need some support in that moment to make sure that everyone walks away safely. So.
learning how to put egos and pride aside, even to put politics aside, and
Yeah.
to collaborate, which means give and take, compromise from every angle,
Yeah.
for the purpose of making sure that people are being helped in the most holistic and best way possible. And I think, it just makes so much sense. It's a win-win for everyone. Again, I can't imagine being a police officer and also having this on my plate on top of it. And so, I'm very forthcoming. When I do talk to police, I'm very willing to be like, hey, I'm Stacy Smith running for city council. I'm trying to get mobile crisis units so that you don't have to go on mental health calls anymore. And I do kind of like prepare for pushback, but the overwhelming response is either, oh my goodness, yes, like I'm on board with this, or that sounds great, I don't think it's going to happen. And so, I would love to see Cincinnati in a few years making that possible, and following in the footsteps of programs like yours and cities like Denver, who have already taken a progressive and I think like futuristic, forward thinking way of handling this problem. And I think it's so important too, because mental health and trauma is rooted in everything. Trauma is a cause and a symptom of poverty. It's a cause and a symptom of homelessness. It's a cause and a symptom of violence and crime, and just all down the line. So I think all of the issues that we as larger cities need to be facing, if mental health is not a part of that conversation, it's a very incomplete plan and very incomplete conversation. And I think that having something available like what STAR is doing in Denver doesn't complete everything, because I don't think the puzzles are ever going to be fully put together, but it's a huge piece that has been missing for far too long. And I'm really hoping that Cincinnati has the same kind of awakening that Denver has and realizes that this is important, this is needed, let's get it done, kind of thing. Yep. But I really, really appreciate your time this evening. Thank you so much. I may have to drop you an email in the future and be like, hey, we need to talk again. But I just really appreciate you and everything that you've done. And again, your time and your willingness to share with me and Cincinnati what has worked really well in Denver.
Cool. Yeah, anything we can do to kind of help educate or give any of our knowledge, we're more than willing to do it, because I think these things in communities is so important and kind of the next step. So anything we can do to get those started, we will absolutely do.